Hello everyone, this is Chidanand from CRUDSInfotech NG. Welcome to this short tutorial on building Docker images. To be very precise, this covers the basics of what exactly is required to build a Docker image. Now, many of you would probably know that a Docker image is built by specifying some instructions in a particular file called Dockerfile, which is nothing but a kind of a build file for building Docker images. The file name has to be exactly Dockerfile. Of course, it's changed right now. You can give any other file as well. But then, going by the thumb rule, the file name has to be Dockerfile, and then well within the Docker file you put some instructions to build your images. Now these instructions should follow some sort of a syntax where you have an instruction which is in capital and then some sort of an arguments which can be in small case. Now it's very hard for someone to understand what does these instructions really mean. And to be very honest, the six topmost instruction that you would probably put in any Docker file is what I have listed out here, starting from the from, work directory, copy, run, expose, cmd, and possibly entry point. Now it's very hard for someone to understand what these instructions stand for. So what I will try to demo is showcase how to build probably a web application using a container to begin with. I will try all that I can do to bring up a container and then take the source code of in any web application that I want to build and then build that application, get that to work, and then I will convert whatever steps that I did, manual steps that I did, and I will make a Docker file out of it. That way, anybody who's kind of pretty new to building Docker images, they'll pretty much understand what does these instructions stand for and how to use these instructions. Let's take this example of an open source web application. I will leave the GitHub URL so that everybody can try this out in case somebody wants to try this out. So this is a cheap clone of our Facebook application, and this whole repository is cloned or rather forked from this open source repository. All right, so now this has got the source code to how to build a kind of web application and what are the prerequisites in order to build it. And if you see here, it very clearly says that the source code is written in C programming language. There's a dependency on something called SQLite, and what other prerequisites are there in order to build this application, starting from the operating system and a bunch of tools that is required. It also has got instructions how to actually build this application, and if everything goes well, there's a binary that is created or generated and how to launch this binary, and if this binary actually gets running, it is to actually listen to port 8080. Now if I were to convert this application into a Docker image, a couple of ways of doing it. The first, as I was saying, we'll try to follow some simplistic method. Not that the image that we're going to build is going to be a super efficient image, but let's stick to the basics here and try to spin up a container which is based upon Ubuntu. The idea here is that we're building a first cut of our image, and this is the first time we're kind of migrating from an application which was running on plain vanilla Ubuntu servers onto the Docker container. So what I want to do is I will use any one of these tools where I have a Docker machine, and then I will spin up a container. For this container, the base container that I'm going to use will be an Ubuntu layer, just because the application needs Ubuntu. Now, when I spin up the container, assuming that everything kind of goes well in the end, I would want to link 8080 of this particular container onto some available port, because how do I check whether my application has come up or not? Okay, so let's assume that 8080, that's the port on which the application, the source code is built. If at all everything goes well, I'll kind of link it when I launch the container. I will link it to port 8080 of my Docker machine, so that even if the application doesn't come up, in order to go and debug and find out what is happening, I need a port to be opened up. So I'm going to link port 8080 to the port 8080 of the container, and I'm going to launch a container. Possibly I'll give a name for the container called FP, and I'm going to use the base image as Ubuntu. The source code for Facebook is available in the GitHub repository under this folder or under the repo called Facebook 2. The reason why I have 2 is because I already have another Facebook where I've done some changes, so I didn't want to touch that. So it is called Facebook 2. So now the source code is on the GitHub. I'm going to clone it onto this Docker machine, and then possibly I will log into this particular container, take the source code into the repository, and then install all kinds of tools that is required for the application to be built. And then I'm going to launch the binary, assuming that I succeed in building that binary. And then the binary, if at all it launches, it's going to listen to port 8080. Based upon this linking, this is linked to the 8080 of the Docker machine. So if everything goes well, if I open up a browser and hit the IP address of my machine and port 8080, that should automatically get redirected to this particular container. Now this is going to be my first approach. If I manage to build this successfully, then I can also take a snapshot of this container and create an image out of that. But what I'm more interested in is learning all the manual steps that are required in order to build a container, and then use that as a prerequisite, or use that learning in coming up with my Docker file, which will create an image for me based upon whatever steps I've followed manually to come up with this container. For the lab, I'm using this utility called Play with Docker. I was having some issues with this Play with Docker. That's why, I kind of started it without the recording. But in case you're interested in understanding what is Play with Docker, you can refer to one of my previous tutorials. So I will use this as a sandbox for all my Docker exercise. So I've already pulled an Ubuntu base image. So Docker image ls, my bad, Docker images or image ls. I've just pulled Docker Ubuntu, which is nothing but the Dockerized Ubuntu, the latest Dockerized Ubuntu, which is available on Docker Hub. So I've already pulled this image. So let me kind of spin up a container now. So Docker run -i interactive terminal daemon. All right, and I'll give a name for my container. I will call it FB, and I will power it with Ubuntu. And in Ubuntu, I just want to just start the bash. But before this, one important thing is I want to link the port 8080. This is the container port. This has to be 8080. This one, the other port, has to be any port, any available port on the Docker machine. Okay, so just to keep it simple, I'm going to give the same port. But the second one need not be 80. It could be anything based upon what port is available on your machine. So I just spun up a container. The container doesn't have anything. It is just powered by a base Ubuntu. That's all that it is powered with. All right. Now, let me actually log into this particular, or before that, let me do one more thing. Let me grab the source code that is required so that I can later copy that. So git clone. Now, where is the source code? The source code is available on the GitHub repository at this location, and it is a public repository doesn't need any authentication. So git clone, Control Shift V. I'm going to clone this repository right here on the box. All right. Now let me use one of the Docker commands. I need to take this source code right into the container. The container that is running is called FB. That is the name of my container. So let me copy this source code to a specific folder. Now, which folder, all that is provided here. Okay, it has to be opt. Now Facebook or Facebook 2 doesn't really matter. So let me copy this folder, docker copy. All right, what do I want to copy? I want to copy Facebook. Okay, docker cp. Okay, Facebook, I want to copy Facebook 2 to where do you want to copy it to? The FB, the container under opt folder. All right, so docker cp. Now when we convert all these steps to the Dockerfile syntax, you will understand what is docker copy, okay, or the copy command well within the Dockerfile syntax. All right, so now let me get into the container, docker attach fb. All right, I'm right inside the container. If at all I look at the opt folder, my source code is also there. Now I need a bunch of tools to be installed. Okay, the first and foremost is I need to do an apt get update. I don't have to do a sudo because I'm already a root. So let me just copy this. Control Shift. If at all I say who am I, I'm always the kind of root because that is the default user. Control Shift V, apt get update. The first step is used to update all the libraries, all the source code, all the tools that is there, because I just pulled a basic Docker image. I don't know what is updated, what is not. All right. After that, I'm going to install a bunch of tools. apt install, build essential, the make utility, then SQLite 3, and then one more thing. I don't know what is that, but these are all the prerequisites that is required. So let me just run this command. So I came up with a basic container, Ubuntu container, which is powered by an Ubuntu box. Then I've also taken the source code in there. And right now I'm updating that Ubuntu box or the Ubuntu container with all the prerequisites, libraries, and the build tools. Now pretty much I have everything that I need. So how do I build this particular code? Go to this opt Facebook 2 folder, that is where I have the code, and then just do a make all. Okay, so let me try that. So cd opt Facebook 2 20 doesn't really matter because you just have to keep the source code here and then say make all. So if everything goes well, in the binary folder there is a file created, ls bin. All right, you will find a binary created called Facebook. Now this is our client executable kind of a thing, and we have to actually launch this fellow so that our application would come up and start listening on port 8080. Now if you see here, port 8080 is already open, but if I click on this, nothing comes up because we don't have our application running yet. All right, so how do I run this application? This small caveat, it has to be run from the opt folder only as bin Facebook. Now if I run it as bin Facebook, now you find that my source code launched and it is listening to port 8080, and as I said earlier, 8080 is mapped to 8080 of my Docker machine. So if at all hit this URL now, I should see my application coming up. Now you'll find a bunch of logs happening here because I'm right inside the container. I can see pretty much whatever is happening here. Not all the functionalities may work here. I've not tried it, but then pretty much whatever we wanted to kind of see. This is an indication that the application has come up properly. We've got all the code and the binaries that is required for us. Application is running well within the container. Now, if at all I want, I can stop this, I can get out of this, and I can take a copy by doing a Docker container commit, because I already have this container which has got pretty much the source code, but then I have to launch that binary manually. But then I kind of figure out all the steps that is required in order to build my application on the container. Now let me take this knowledge and write a Docker file out of this. Let me open up the Docker file, which I've already kind of written. So if you go here into the same folder, there is a Docker file. There's a Docker file which I've already written, but just let's take a look at what does this Docker file look like. All right, from Ubuntu, the base image for us is Ubuntu. If I don't specify any tag, that means there is the latest one. Work directory, OPT, Facebook 2. Well within the image that you're building or the container that's going to be launched, what folder or which folder do you want all the instructions to kind of begin with? So that is what is work dir. So anything that I specify after this, if I don't specify any path or any absolute path or directory, all those instructions would refer to this work directory. Like example, if I say copy dot space dot, copy all the files that is present in the particular folder wherever I am, copy that to the work directory from outside to inside. This is pretty much similar to the Docker cp command that we ran. After that, a run command, apt get update, apt get install, whatever tool sets that we were supposed to install manually can all be achieved by using the run command. There can be any number of run commands while within your Docker file. Okay, run make all. Now, when I say make all, I don't specify which folder. This is kind of understood that the default one is what is set in the work directory. So after the tools are installed, in this particular folder, make all happens. So that means the binary would get built. So once the binary is built, expose 8080, whatever port that your container or your image is supposed to listen to, use expose command. It could be one, it could be multiple. At times, there are the use cases where your application would want to listen to multiple ports. As long as the container which is being launched out of that will have to map that port using the -p option. But if your application has to listen to some port, you have to use the expose command. If there are no expose commands, then potentially your application or the container, whatever you're going to be launching using this particular image, will not be able to communicate with the outside world. The most important and the last instruction, cmd. Everything is fine. We got the source code, we built all the application. But what is that binary that I should launch so that my application starts running? Okay, bin Facebook. Now here again in the cmd, I'm not specifying any folder. If I don't specify any folder, whatever is present in the work directory is the is something that it defaults to. Now I put all this in a file called Dockerfile, and I put this right along with all the other source code as well. And if I want, I can also use Jenkins in order to build my Dockerfile. I don't have that use case right now. You can refer to one of my previous videos where I've showed how to use Jenkins in order to build an image and then push it to a Docker registry as well. What I want to do now is complete this exercise by using this Docker file and building an image and then launching it and checking if everything goes well. I've cleaned up all the containers. I've removed all the containers. ps-a, nothing is up and running. Let me get on to the Facebook folder. Right here in this folder, there is this Docker file. And the Dockerfile has got all kinds of instructions as to kind of how to build it. Okay, so I went through all of them. So the only thing that I want to highlight is copy dot. So whatever is present in this particular folder, which is pretty much all the source code, copy that to inside the container to the work directory, which is specified by opt facebook 2. All right, so it's got the source code and the instructions. Sometimes it's always a good practice that people use some tools like Jenkins in order to build this as well. That also works, but I'm not going to demo that here. So docker build dot. This is the instructions to the Docker engine, which is responsible for building the images. Build dot hyphen t. When I say dot, the context is right here. The Docker file, which is the default file, is also present here. In case you have a other file other than Docker file where you put the instruction, you can specify a hyphen f tag and specify what is the name of the file. It need not be Dockerfile, but since we followed the best practices, we have our Dockerfile in the file called Dockerfile, no prefix, no suffix. So docker build dot hyphen t. What is the name of the image that you want to build? fb colon v1, some particular image. All right, now if you see here the build context, which is nothing but all the files, folders, whatever is present in that particular folder is sent to the Docker engine. Now if you look at the architecture of a Docker machine, there is a Docker client and there's a Docker engine. On this box, both client and Docker, engines are both present, but otherwise internally there's a little bit of a demarcation as to who builds what. So the context is sent by the client to the Docker engine. Docker engine is responsible for building all that. Now, whatever you see here is nothing but Docker engine is picking up all the instructions. It's got the source code. Whatever we did manually, all that is running well within the context of the Docker engine, and eventually it kind of built a particular image with the name that I specified. So if at all I say Docker images, along with the Ubuntu which we pulled from Docker Hub, you'll also find my image fp colon v1. Now let us just check if at all this image actually represents whatever we built. Okay, so let me launch a container, docker run hyphen d. I don't want to do anything else. Hyphen p, link the port. What port? Whatever port that you want from the outside world. Let me link it to a different port, 9090 colon 8080. The outside word, that is the Docker engine, is going to be 9090, and the container port, this cannot change because we built that image which exposes port 8080. So this one can change based upon what is available, what is not. All right, and what is the image name? fp colon v1. I don't have to specify the bin, Facebook, and all that because all that we already put it as a default CMD. All right, so let's launch this and Docker PS. Now, if you see here, the image is the image. This is the default CMD with which we built it, which is nothing but bin Facebook. All right, so outside word 9090, which is pointing to 8080. So let me see if I hit this. All right, so as good as whatever step that we followed, which is exactly what this image also is about. And as per DevOps, everything should be as good. The first steps that we followed was a manual step. Now we have a Docker file, which is nothing but the exact replication of whatever activities that we did manually, which is converted into this particular syntax. Now, this is also one of the best practices, so-called GitOps model, or whatever everything as code kind of a concept, where whatever you build and the steps, it has to be automated and has to put in some sort of a script. I hope you found the tutorial informative, and if someone wants to try it out, the GitHub repository that I used during my demo, the URL is provided in the description of my YouTube tutorial. Anyone wants to try it out, please do so. And in case you hit upon some issues, I hope not, but then in case you do, kindly drop me a note and I will try to address it as soon as I can. Thank you so much for stopping by and watching. You guys have a great day.